Hello. Welcome to the Varietal Literature Lit Games. My name is Rory. If you've been here before, then you already know what's going on. So, I don't need to explain it. But if you haven't, you probably don't know what's going on either. Neither of them know what's going on, to be honest.
I don't know what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. This is where we come on and make noise for 90 minutes and then try to call it art. Anyways, I'm Rory. I'm a writer at the Varietal. And this is Felix Wildcard Wong from Hong Kong. He's also a writer in the Varietal. Say hello to the fine people, Felix.
Hello, everybody. I am calling in from Hong Kong.
Yeah, you are. From as we established last time, windowless love hotel with no fridge, no stove.
And actually, now a broken air conditioner.
Oh, it's broken.
That's nice.
Well, that's okay. I hear that Hong Kong's generally cold.
Especially in the summer months, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's known for its blustery Nordic type summer months.
Like -30 in the summertime.
Hello, Caroline, and hello, Holly. Let us know if the sound mix is off or things are too loud or you can't hear somebody, so we can adjust it before we get too deep. So I'll cut right to it. We're kind of doing two things at once here today. We're doing things a bit differently. And for those who've been following the Lit Games from the beginning, Lit Games is just sort of a title, and we try different things. And the notion of Lit Games is just basically, we're writers, we like writing, so we set little challenges and see if we can write under them. And if we can't, it's funny. And if we can, hey, that's great. So usually it's been funny. Oh, Diane's letting out secrets. We'll save that for a minute, Diane. Whatever. I'll just say it then. Felix, you have been published.
Actually, not really. I don't think the story is out. I'm not sure if it is or not. I don't think it's out. I think they published the interview.
They did.
Before they published the story, which is a little weird because the interview spoils what happens in the story.
I was thinking that myself. I was like, they're really piecing apart the story here. Is this advertising or pulling it apart? So
I don't know if the interview makes sense without reading it.
Yeah, it does. It does. I think it does.
Okay.
Because the point of the interview is to get to know you. So chat knows what we're talking about. Felix has had a short story kind of nonfiction thing published in a literary magazine called Prism, Prism.
A rival publication.
No, not a rival publication. The Varietal is like an artist commune. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, because that's something else that I wanted to clarify with people, because we've been going for a while and I haven't really explained what any of this is, so I'm going to try and do that today as well. Prism, Prism. If you don't know it, Prism's a pretty big literary mag. I would say it's probably the biggest I know of. It's not the oldest or anything, but it's kind of modern times big time thing to be published. Everyone in the chat is congratulating you, Felix. Yes, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
And not only did he get published in Prism, which is a challenge in and of itself, and not a lot of people get that, but they also chose to interview him specifically. And that interview is actually available. I do not have the link. So I don't know. Check out Felix's Instagram. He probably has it up there somewhere. No, actually, wait a minute. What am I talking about? No, you don't. Of course you don't.
I don't know where that idea came from.
You're terrible at advertising yourself.
Yeah, I don't advertise, yeah.
You probably were like, I think it's probably better if I don't advertise myself, because I think that'll actually bring in more of you readers or something strange. Um, so unfortunately, if you want to read his story, Prism is a subscription based journal, so you would have to be a subscriber. I don't think there's anywhere you can view it for free. But I am going to talk a little bit about, because I think it's actually a really, the story itself is good that you wrote. But what I think is also interesting is sort of the adventure you went on to get it. And I remember when you were texting me about it, I thought that was interesting as well. And I won't share all the texts that you sent, because I'm sure some of them you don't want me to make public. But they are... well, let's just say Felix has lived a more interesting life than us in the last couple of years. So I'm going to ask him a bit about that today. That's like one of my things I want to give you, chat, a chance to hear about is Felix's sort of adventures in Thailand and China, and why he got pulled out that way. And then, of course, if you are interested in reading a story, I'm sure you can get a single edition of Prism or something. You could do it that way.
Or just wait.
Yeah.
I hear that it's going to be posted online this summer for free, so... I'm really selling them, though.
You really... Whatever, it's not your responsibility to sell your own work.
Yeah, I don't get anything out of it.
Now, as far as what we're doing for the lit game side of it, we're gonna do something. I don't know if you can count it as a game. It's sort of a game. There's a challenge to it. As you'll see on the screen next to me, there's some basic structure of a story up. So the structure, I'll just read it in case you can't read it. The protagonist wakes up late. When they go outside, they discover their car is missing. They quit their job. And it's meant to be sort of a really rudimentary structure for maybe a paragraph that introduces a story, or in itself a little story like a flash fiction thing, whatever it ends up being. But what I want us to do with it is we're going to take some turns writing out in a certain style or a genre those three events. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why we as writers choose the things we do depending on what kind of setting we're in and what kind of genre we're trying to achieve, or what kind of emotion we're trying to capture or whatever. So we'll do that a few times while I talk to Felix about his time researching for Thailand and so on. And I'm just doing it this week, so if it's not your thing, you don't have to watch it, of course, and you can come back and we'll do something else or something similar next week. But this is just sort of a chance for us to show some technique, I guess, as writers, and discuss it a bit, if that's something that interests you. Also, if you have questions while I'm talking to Felix about his journey, be sure to put them in chat, and I will try and get him to answer them. I can't make promises. You guys know Felix. He's a wild card. That's why we call him Wild Card Long.
I'm not very good at answering questions, I realize.
Yeah, you are. There was like 4 paragraphs of answers to every question the interviewer asked you, so I'm expecting that here.
Okay. True. I will go for that, though.
So actually the first style I'm going to write in is literary fiction, and which is sort of a modern literary style. And what I want you to do, Felix, is to sort of frame up a bit for people why you went to Thailand in the first place. And yeah, we'll just sort of start with that. Like, what prompted you over there?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting story. Have you seen the movie The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio?
I have. Actually, I have. I didn't like that movie.
Yeah, neither did I, actually. That had nothing to do with me going to Thailand.
No, seriously, why'd you go to Thailand?
Yeah, like it wasn't like I was going for fun
No.
or something, or going to find some, untamed beach, that kind of thing. I don't really know how to sum this up in a nice, concise package. Uh, I basically learned that a few years before I was born, a relative of mine died in a very high-profile plane crash in Thailand, and it was like to date, it's Thailand's worst plane crash, and this happened in 1991. And I only learned this pretty recently, it's about like a year and a half ago now. No, actually, almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And so I started wondering about why, like, I think I was 25-ish, maybe 20. I don't remember how old I was, man. I wanted to know why it took so many years before somebody told me that this relative died in this way. Why wasn't this something that was more discussed in the family? It felt more like a secret rather than, yeah, just part of our family history. And I wanted to know if this was like a Chinese thing, and just what motivated my family to keep this part of our history in the dark, basically. And yeah, because it happened in 1991, and I learned about it in 2019. So many years had gone by that people, those in my family who were involved in the accident, they had forgotten what happened, and so I was hearing conflicting versions of this airplane accident. Major details, kind of like when it happened, to details like what happened afterwards, like how was the body of my aunt claimed, who went to claim the body, that sort of stuff. There was just so many like questions, so I decided that the sensible thing to do was to travel to the crash site in Thailand first and try to get some answers there. And yeah, that is what I did.
Yeah, so I remember you saying this, and I remember my first thought being, I know it's a weird thing to say, but I was kind of jealous because I was like, man, I gotta like,
Don't you wish you had an aunt who died in a plane?
yeah, well, no, but I like everything about it was intrigue, right? And I guess maybe this sort of peels back a little bit. The worst side of writers is like my first thought was that's a great story, and you to have a personal connection to a story, is so rare and like immediately makes it stand out for a reader, and like all these kind of like I've been writing too long thoughts. But then I had the thought, which Holly is calling to attention, which is something I noticed that the Prism Writer never really brought up. Did you feel any sense of loss about that? Because like they're family and you never knew them exactly, but especially as you were going around and finding out about them, was there a sense of like I wish I could have talked to them, or or did it still feel sort of distant and theoretical?
Yeah, so it's my aunt who died, which is she is my mom's older sister, and because my mom has so many siblings, she has like 7 or 8 siblings in total.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't feel that loss, right? It was like, sure, I'm missing one aunt, but I still have like all these aunts. So like those my aunts and uncles spoke about losing that aunt like it's a very fortunate thing. They said that in those years, I was really lucky that for a family of their size, they only lost one of their siblings. That they didn't lose more to, like, for example, like poverty or like famine or something like that, or sickness, right? They thought that they had already lucked out.
That's a hell of a thing to say.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know what it was like to grow up in like 1960s Hong Kong. Maybe it was pretty bad. So they don't really feel too much of a sense of loss anymore either. But yeah, for me, like, just I never met that aunt. I've only seen pictures of her. I don't really know all that much about her even now after doing all my research. So yeah, no real sense of loss. But I do wonder what she would be like today if she was around. I wonder if she'd be a cool aunt or she'd be like,
yeah,
not so cool. I think she'd be cool just because she was really she seemed really westernized for someone up from that period in time, actually.
Yeah, I mean, without being too philosophical or cliched or anything, what I would say is, like, every time I find out about somebody in any detail whatsoever, I do kind of feel that sense of loss, because it reminds me that everybody is very unique and they all have these really, everyone has like at least 5 or 6 really cool stories from their life, and then to know that they just basically melt away with them. I mean, that's the nature of life, but I get reminded in moments like that. So I was wondering if you had any moments like that. That's why I was asking. I will also add that Tanya R. Lines, which, hello Tanya, good to see you. She said, do the different places you live influence your style of writing? And I'm assuming she means, like, not just do you draw inspiration from where you live, but like where you currently live. Like, do you find that you write differently in Hong Kong than you did in Edmonton or in Vancouver?
That's a good question. It's one I hadn't even ever considered. I don't know, probably. I wouldn't be able to tell you like exactly how. It's not like, oh, my writing becomes a lot more layered and pretty when I'm living in Hong Kong or something.
Yeah.
Did I just get disconnected?
Okay. There was a stutter. It's okay. You're coming from Hong Kong. Everybody understands. Carry on.
Yeah, there's no internet here.
Yeah. No, there's an entire ocean of cable that it has to travel through.
I wish I got a better answer for this. Maybe I'll come back to it later. I've got to think about this.
Does it feel different at least? Like, do you find that like where is the hardest place for you to write? Was it hardest to write in Edmonton, hardest to write in Hong Kong, or hardest to write in Vancouver?
Oh, Edmonton for sure. I didn't write in Edmonton. I was so miserable.
Drank.
And I was so focused on trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
It was so cold.
Yeah. I guess maybe it's just the benefit of a multitude of experiences, but I, like, as a part of my job, I go around to a lot of little small towns and stuff like that. And in Canada, I should say. And Edmonton really is not that bad. There are places which I guess in like a public facing stream I shouldn't call out, but there are places that are inexcusably terrible places that Edmonton is well above. But I can understand, as somebody who went from Hong Kong to Vancouver and then going to Edmonton, that's just a locker of cold air.
I think there's a book there, Rory, to write about the places that are worse than Edmonton.
Why? I've never read it. I've never read it really to anybody, but I wrote a poem about the worst place I've been. And the last half of the poem is 50% the F word. And it wasn't really written to get out to anybody. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'll read this one day. But Nathan just came in.
A coping mechanism?
Nathan says, I'm late, what's going on? So let me just reestablish before we pick back up with the question there. For anybody who's just come in, like Nathan, we're talking about to Felix about a work that's just been published in Prism, the literary magazine, that's based on, well, not based on, it is the true story that you went out and researched by traveling halfway around the world, about how a family member of yours was in the Thailand airplane crash, not air crash, in 91, and your experiences with that. So we're asking Felix questions about that. And while he's doing that, I'm going to write sort of the same basic little few paragraphs in different styles, and we're going to discuss a little bit like what we notice and how we make different decisions. Suki said,
I will say...
Oh, go ahead.
Just a little bit about the city thing. I think Hong Kong is a really convenient city to write in.
Oh, really?
That everything is so close by, right? Like, if I ever want food or coffee, I just take the elevator down and walk, like, not even 5 minutes. And so it feels like if I really want to write, I can spend a lot more of my time here writing and not getting bogged down by just the time-consuming life stuff.
I can absolutely see how that would be the case, because my hometown was a town called Maple Ridge, which is out here in British Columbia, Canada, and it's sort of a blue collar.
We don't talk about that place.
Yeah, we don't talk about that place. As a professor of mine once said, it's the dirty mall town, and I think that was a pretty good summary. But yeah, the one thing I do really remember about growing up, because it's basically a sprawled suburb for working class people, is that, like, to get anywhere and do anything, unless you had a car, was an hour. And it didn't seem like it should be an hour, but it was. Nathan also lived there with me, and he can vouch for this. Like, it didn't have great buses to begin with, but even if you got on the bus, it was like 40 minutes to get to the center of town, when you might only be technically 5 or 6 blocks back and maybe a few blocks over from where that is. Like, like, walking places took forever. Like, everything took forever. So for the most part, you just kind of stayed in your basement. But that's an interesting observation, because, like, I can see, having never been to Hong Kong, I can see how Hong Kong would be much more convenient, and that would keep you writing.
In theory.
Oh, yeah. Holly said something very accurate. She said, "Don't insult our dirty malls. At least 837 Hallmark movies have been filmed in them." And that is true. For whatever reason, Maple Ridge is the Hallmark movie capital of the world.
Is it actually?
No, but actually it was the capital of the world of something once. I'll let you guess what it is. Or Canada, I should say. It was the capital of this thing in Canada. Take a guess.
Squirrels or something.
Nope. Give me one more.
Potholes.
Meth production. Crystal meth production. That was at one point the capital of Canada for crystal meth production, because we had, in a relatively small area, 3 crystal meth cookies. Yeah, see, Holly just said meth. It was. Holly also lived in Maple Ridge. Okay, so that's enough about me. The question I was going to ask was the question Suki asked. What was the most interesting thing you learned about your aunt's life during your research? I think that's a great question. Thank you, Suki.
That is really good.
So what was, like, even if you can't think of, like, the most, but what was something that was really interesting you learned about your aunt specifically?
I don't know if I want to, like, share this, because
well, you don't
if this ever gets turned into a book, this will be spoilers.
Everyone's going to forget. No one has a short-term memory anymore. They have Google.
That's true. It's true. Well, when I first went to Hong Kong, I found this old trunk, this, like, metal trunk of stuff and documents that just basically contained whatever is left of my aunt. And the trunk hadn't been opened in about 30 years, ever since she died. And so, of course, I opened it and I, like, rummaged through it looking for information and all that. And I had found that she had these wedding photos that were addressed to some of her friends that were not delivered before she died.
Oh,
Like
wow.
it had the names of her friends written on them, and like they were like in envelopes and stuff. But yeah, she just couldn't get them out, I guess. And so I was like, I want to track down these people and try to see if they want these photos still, even though it seemed like an odd thing to do, I guess, but it also made sense to me at that time. And after like, it took about a year for me to track them down because the names they weren't like full names that
You
were written
tracked
down. They were
them
like,
down? Oh my god.
yeah, I did, yeah.
You didn't tell me that. You did tell me
It,
about
it
the
was
letters, but
yeah.
not that.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. Yeah,
Jesus.
but I was able to track them down, and then I had a phone call with one of her friends, and they had all worked at this hospital together, and that was how they met. It was like this group of coworkers from like a specific graduation year of this like nursing school, and they all went to this hospital to work. And yeah, the friend was telling me that their whole friend group is still together after all these years. That they still, if it wasn't for the virus, they would still be meeting together very regularly. And she said that because they're old people, they often reminisce about the past. And she said one thing that often comes up is my aunt. That after all these years, they still haven't forgotten about her. And she told me that they got a lot of stories to tell me, things that I probably wouldn't know because my aunt was kind of a private person. She never talked to her family about her work life. She said there's probably a lot of things that they could tell me that I would have no other way of knowing. But yeah, I was never able to meet up with them just because of the virus. So I do look forward to meeting with them and seeing what her friends have to say about her. But yeah, I just hear that like she was a really positive person and always tried to like help other people and stuff. And I guess she made like a huge lasting impact on her friends.
Well, that's a really touching thing to find out. I mean, that's not hard for me to believe because as much as you feign yourself to be a certain way or discuss yourself a certain way, you are a warm person who is trustworthy and that I like being around. So I can definitely see that.
Oh, you're talking about me?
Yeah. I mean, this is your blood, so I imagine there's some connections. Oh man, we're getting questions galore here. Well, apparently my mom is arguing that it is actually the Hallmark movie capital. It very well could be. There's like 4 a year they film there. Holly's wondering if you felt any sort of connection when you visited the crash site. Some people report those kind of reactions. Now, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think you kind of did. However, maybe not in the same way she's saying. But I will say, why don't you actually tell us about like exactly where the crash site was and how you got there?
Yeah, the crash site is on Google. I think it said that it was about 2 hours from Bangkok. That it would be about a 2-hour drive from Bangkok, which is not true. I don't know how Google came to that number, but it's a really remote part. It's I think it's on the border of what's that place called? It's not Burma anymore. Myanmar? Is that what it's called now?
Are you asking me geography stuff?
Yeah, I'm asking you geography because I don't know geography.
Dude, I don't know geography. I did a degree in philosophy. Geography was for the others who weren't so enlightened. It was all this isolated from history and context ideas that certainly had nothing to do with their surroundings. Like that was the kind of training I got. It's not that I shouldn't know about geography, but I certainly don't.
Well, we need geography help right now. I think it's called Myanmar. It's on the edge of Thailand, anyway. Mm-hmm. And I think in total it took about 4 hours to get there, and it was like basically like gravel roads and stuff for half the time. And the place is now a national park. Ever since the plane crash, the government turned into like a protected area, basically. And when they say national park, it doesn't mean that they expect you to go and visit. It just means that yeah, like it's kind of like government recognized land that you can't just go and start chopping down trees, that kind of thing. They don't expect people to go. Nobody goes.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it's a really remote part. It's in a bamboo forest, and they charge you to go in there. They charge foreigners more, but I think I had to pay like double or triple what my tour guide paid, uh, which doesn't make sense. It's like, why do they charge people going when there's nobody going in?
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
So your tour guide, I remember you talking about him a bit. Um, how did you connect with him? Was he just a guy that you found, or was this the guy that was related to the what was it, the China Post or whatever you were working with?
Yeah, so my tour guide is really a reporter for the South China Morning Post, and then he, through like strange circumstances, we met online, and then he was basically just like, "I'll take you to the crash site if you let me write a story about this." And I thought, well, yeah, that's a fair deal because he lives in Thailand and then he's got like local expertise and stuff, and which is a good thing. I said yes because I found out that if I had not said yes, I would not be able to get there on my own, simply because of the language barrier. Like,
Right.
at a certain point, the local population they actually stop speaking English completely. Yeah, you can't get by with like charades or like single English words. Like yeah, you need like a local translator to get past a certain point. So yeah, it was really good that I had him around to help me out. Yeah, with his help, I was able to get to the crash site, and then he did write an article about it, which is in the South China Morning Post. He was a cool guy.
I remember you. How did you feel about the China Morning Post story? Like, were you okay with it, or did you feel like it took too many liberties or anything like that?
Oh yeah, like, I was totally okay with it. It kind of motivated me to write my own version, actually. In that I feel like the reporter Tibor, he painted me in like too heroic of a light. Um, I think the title of the article is something about a pilgrimage. Like
Oh
he
wow.
painted me as this kid who wanted to pay respect to this aunt, and so in doing that, like I even flew halfway around the world to go on this pilgrimage to the place where she died. But yeah, I don't know. I think my motivations were like a little more not so heroic, I guess. Like it was. He just wrote me in this like such good positive light, and I was like, that's not how I am.
I think I remember you saying this. And to be fair, I think when you started out, I'd said at the beginning that I was like, "Ooh, that's a great story." I think when you started out, that was the similar instinct. You were like, "Yeah, it seems like a good story," and I'm kind of curious about it, whatever. But I do feel like as you invested in it, your feeling about it changed. And actually, I'm gonna pick up on something that you said in the Prism interview, which is you said that when you got there, and I won't sort of blow it, you say whatever you want to say about this, but when you got there, you did something at the burial site that was distinctly Chinese. And you had talked about how that marked a moment where you kind of shifted perspective, that in your earlier works, you had talked a bit about like how strange some of these traditions and rituals were. And then from sort of in this experience, somehow your writing turned more to trying to understand it. And I thought that was really interesting because I see that too. And if anybody has ever looked at our webpage, which I hope you have, which is varietal-literature.ca, it's down in the description, then you will have seen that Felix has put up a story called Chinese Funerals Are Weird. Are strange? Weird? Am I getting the wrong word?
Weird, yeah.
Yeah, weird.
Strange is the sequel.
um, and you basically, I wouldn't say you were like derogatory or mocking or anything, but you definitely took the perspective of like, I don't know why we're doing a lot of this. Um, and it is interesting because I have noticed, having read more of your work, that kind of tone shifts a bit. And that was the first time I'd heard you sort of tag it to this experience of visiting the burial site.
Right. Yeah. So it was less of something that I did, but rather what I didn't do. It's like when we got to the crash site, like Tibor was like, like, are there any ceremonies you wanna do here? Like, is there any way that you want to show respect specifically, that it kind of thing? And then I had this moment where I was like, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? And he was like, I don't know. Like, because what happened was that the driver that we hired, he was on his knees and he had incense in his hand, and he was like, going like that. It was because he had recently won this lottery, playing. The number he played was the amount of people that died in a plane crash.
Wow. So, okay.
Yeah.
What a way to pick a number.
So, yeah, exactly. So in his mind, he won with the help of the spirits of the people that died. So he wanted to go there and pay respect, say thank you, and he wanted to ask them to give him another winning number. That was sort of his motivation for doing that. And then I guess, I didn't really have anything to ask for, right? So I didn't think to prepare incense and like flowers and stuff and ask for some sort of like divine help. I was just like, hey, I'm here. And so when Tibor asked if I wanted to perform any rituals, I thought, like, what am I supposed to do? In Chinese culture, just what are we supposed to do in times like this? And I also started wondering, like why don't I know this? And the rituals that Chinese people do perform, like why do they do that? And so I after that I realized that maybe I was a little too whitewashed. Maybe I needed to get more in touch with my culture and learn a bit about this stuff.
I mean, it's entirely possible. There's a complete absence of culture here, so I think that's entirely possible. I think actually linking to that, well, first of all, Diane had a question. She said, "What is your aunt's name?" Really?
Dude.
You wrote a story about her.
I know. Okay, I got it. I've never said her name in English, and I always called her by her
that's
nickname.
fair. All right, I thought you just legitimately had never.
No, I know. I blanked out for a second. So her last name is Fung, Fung, and her first name is Yukwan, Yukwan, and it means jade cloud.
Oh, that's a beautiful term. Then Diane also asked, the thing about the word aunt is it has a natural distance unless you modify it. Do you feel you are getting closer to your aunt as you investigate this? I mean, we talked a little bit about that, but I think that's a little bit more of a finer point on it. So I'm going to pose the question.
I guess so. I feel like I got as close as anyone will ever get, because nobody else will ever go to the crash site. Basically, nobody else in my family will ever go to the crash site. And I think I kind of dug up a lot of questions about my aunt that my relatives have not considered in all these years. And so I wouldn't say that I learned enough about my aunt to be like, yeah, I know who she is now. I know the things she did. No, there's still so much I don't know about her. But yeah, I guess I got closer than anybody else has since she died. Yeah.
And then just covering these off, what I was going to say is that linking up to Holly, question, because you were talking about understanding some of your traditions. She said, I find the Hungry Ghost Month fascinating. You have to burn stuff to send it to the deceased? She seems to not understand that. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Yeah, I think the Hungry Ghost Month, it generally lands in August because they go by the Chinese calendar, which is always shifting, basically. Every date in the Chinese calendar kind of matches up to a different date of our like normal calendar every
Right.
year. It's always changing. But I think
It's not the normal calendar. It's the
I
Gregorian
don't know what you call
calendar,
it.
which
I just call
means
it the normal.
it was just some dude who took a calendar that was largely from the pagans and added in some stuff. It's just a Western calendar. Anyways, carry on.
Yeah, I think generally lands in August, and it's a month when Chinese people believe that the spirits of the underworld get to come back to Earth. The gates of hell open, and ghost of like ancestors and like both good ghosts and bad ghosts and demons too, that they get to walk the earth again. It's a kind of a freaky thing. Remember in the past August, I saw because you do burn stuff. There's a lot of different things you can burn as offerings for the dead, and I kind of thought that this was a thing that only old people do.
Okay.
In the last August, because I live in downtown, I saw a lot of young people. I think they were shop owners or something. They would bring out these metal trash cans in front of their store, and they would burn stuff. I think they couldn't have been any older than I was. They're probably in their 20s, but there were like a lot of groups of 20-year-olds burning stuff in front of their store, and I think they wanted to bring like wealth and prosperity to their business. That's why they were doing it. They weren't doing it strictly out of some selflessness. Yeah, like it's a thing that people still do. It's not some sort of bygone tradition, apparently.
Yeah, actually, speaking of burning things, you had mentioned this in the prison interview too, and you had said that at the burial site, yeah, there was the burning as well. But you mentioned in the prison interview, like you wanted to investigate, like why burning. Did you ever get like a succinct answer to that?
I asked a lot of different people, because I ended up interviewing a few professionals who work in Hong Kong's funeral trade, and I had all these questions to ask them, and yeah, that was one of them. It's like, why fire? And I think one of them said that I don't have the notes with me, so I don't know exactly what he said. I'm summarizing, but I think he said that fire is kind of the essence of life. That yeah, just fire cleanses and brings life and all that jazz. He said it really well, and I'm not doing his answer any justice. But
Right.
yeah, he made it sound like it had to be fire. Like there's just no other way that you could do this.
Yeah, I will say it's interesting, that connection too, because in a lot of ways, I mean, this isn't entirely true after a certain era, but in a lot of ways, like China was somewhat, it developed in fairly in isolation. Like it's a little bit different than like Europe, where there was always a bit of a mix and spread and whatever else. It was always a fairly established country, as I understand it. I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Um, but nonetheless, almost every culture has some kind of relationship to this. You know, my experience with it is in Christianity, where it's they talk about like ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? Like you come from nothing and go to nothing physically. And there are, I wouldn't say really well established anymore rituals, but there are little rituals in the Catholic Church and so on that make that same kind of observation about sort of becoming smoke, being something about the dead. It's a beautiful metaphor. It's just interesting that
that
everyone
is.
landed on it.
Yeah, they must know something that we don't.
Loss. We're too young. I don't know. So you had said that you were actually, this is something that I'll bring up. So you talked about like when you were starting to look into these rituals and understand them. So I didn't know that at the time, but I remember you texting me and asking me a very odd question, and I won't totally relay the conversation because I'm sure some of it you don't want to
What did
know.
I ask? I don't remember.
But you had sought out somebody, and I won't be too specific about what they did, but somebody who was involved in some of that mysticism aspect. And then you'd said you'd gone and interviewed this person because you talked about the struggle to find people to interview in the first place in the Prism article.
Right.
And so you had gone out and sought out this, finally got somebody who would talk to you about it. And I remember you asked me, you said, how do I know if this guy's a charlatan or not? And I will say that my response was, you're probably asking the wrong guy, because I kind of think all of that is probably charlatanism, and that's just because I'm a really skeptical person. But and I kind of put it at that. But like looking back now, where you've sort of had some time with the content, do you look at that interview any differently, or do you still look at this guy like?
I do. I do.
Okay, good.
That's a very interesting point you bring up. Yeah, basically at the time, this guy who appears in a lot of Western media, like he's been interviewed a lot of times. So what he does is he makes these, I think they're called in English, Joss paper effigies. So he makes basically these paper sculptures of things you would burn for ghosts, or for, I think it's mostly for your ancestors, because you probably wouldn't burn anything too intricate for the spirit of someone that you don't know, right? And so anything you request, he would...
Wait. You can't just say that. That's not an obvious thing to me. So why would you not burn something too intricate for somebody you didn't know?
Because it costs money, right? Like, what do you care about some ghosts that you don't know? You're not going to spend too much on them. Like,
oh man, I thought this was going to be a cool answer. You're like, no, come on, we're not making money.
You don't care about your neighbor. Like, you care about like your blood. Like, you want them to get like paper Rolls Royce. The neighbor can just get like freaking, I don't know, G-Shock or something. But yeah. So this guy, he makes these paper offerings, and he graciously accepted the interview. But then when I went, I guess I started grilling him a little bit. I was asking him whether he believes in ghosts, why, whether he's seen any ghosts, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he started shutting down, and he shut down pretty fast. Like at one point, he didn't even answer my questions anymore. It was his wife who was sitting nearby who was answering my questions.
Okay.
And the wife was just kind of speaking on his behalf, like framing answers from his point of view, even though it's coming from her. And yeah, it was pretty weird. And I just thought, like, you know, I was getting weird vibes from the guy. Like, he seemed really different from the way that he was portrayed in the media. They made him to be some master. And he's been in the industry for decades. But then, from what I observed, it just seemed like, I don't know. Charlatan is the wrong word, but he didn't seem like a master. And then I later interviewed somebody who is an actual master. I think the other person I interviewed also makes these joss paper effigies, but that guy has a Guinness World Record building, like I think the tallest like paper lantern or something.
Wow.
He gets a lot of government contracts to build these tall paper effigies to display at festivals. And this guy owns like a funeral home too. This guy's rich. Like he made a lot of money off doing these things. And he was very blunt. He's like, yeah, you know, ghosts are kind of bullshit.
Well, that's interesting.
He's like, yeah.
What does he see all of it as? Like just rituals to help with grief, or what?
Yeah. So he says that whenever people ask him if they should perform any rituals, he says no. He would tell them to not waste their money and not do this stuff. And he said that if you can go to sleep that night without any problems, then you're fine. But he says that if you can't sleep, or if you get like nightmares with your ancestors coming back to haunt you and whatnot, then maybe you should do some rituals. But he's like, yeah, it's only for believers, and he says it's all kind of a sham. But if you believe in it, then yeah, do it. Otherwise,
now that's really interesting because I remember some years ago I had a conversation with somebody about paganism, which has taken a lot of different forms over the years, and I mean it's in lots of different cultures, but it's kind of like it's not really a term that most people who are pagans at that time would have called themselves. It's just sort of what the church called everything that wasn't the church at that time. But apparently there is like an ongoing debate about how much anybody who was doing paganism and stuff actually believed that it was magic in the literal like fantasy sense that we have now.
Oh, okay.
And like how much they really thought there were gods that would do things or whatever else, and how much of it was really more engaged on a therapeutic level. That there are these things in your life that you don't control, and so there's comfort in a ritual. Just a sort of a temporary, I don't want to say fantasy, it's a bit more deeper than that, but it's sort of a temporary respite and something you feel like you can do, and a kind of a ritual towards hope and peace, to keep it alive in yourself. It's interesting to hear him say it that way because I would not have expected somebody to say that, and I'm sure you didn't either. But I feel like it's a really interesting point, that in some ways, because there are rituals that people undertake in other cultures for the dead that are still undertaken many years later, that don't have any kind of religious or spiritual context to them, that do the same thing, right? So like, there's the famous Irish wake where you drink with the body, right?
Do you keep the body around when you?
I mean, traditionally, yes. It's like 3 days of drinking with the body. No, I mean, there is some practical reasons for that. There's quite a few traditions around staying with a body for a while. I know that there's Jewish observances around that too. And the like historical account I've heard as to why people do that was, medicine wasn't particularly great back then. So like pronouncing someone dead was a bit of a crapshoot. So before you buried them, you would make sure they were dead. So that involved like waiting with the body for a while, and if they came back, which apparently sometimes happened, then you didn't accidentally kill someone. I know it's super morbid, but
like John would just wake up in the middle of a wake and he'd just be like,
yeah,
where's my shot of whiskey?
Which, man, if I could arrange that I would do that. That would be amazing. Just everyone like sadly drinking whiskey and being like, oh my god, somebody turn up the music. I just find that interesting because there's rituals for therapeutic reasons, and then there's rituals for like literal spirit, superstitious kind of reasons. And it's interesting that you found two people that had like different perspectives. Do you think now you have some understanding why that guy got all quiet when you talked about ghosts, or do you still feel confused?
Yeah, I think he knew that he was sort of peddling bullshit, to be honest.
If I could offer a contra review, I wonder if maybe that question, when it's asked to him in other contexts, is followed quickly by, more and more questions about, are you a charlatan? And so maybe like he just didn't want to engage the line.
Right. I asked because of all the interviews I found, nobody had asked him that, or at least it wasn't recorded. And then he did talk to me about how he is able to see ghosts. He told me a story about how one time he was on the way home and he saw like a woman who was a ghost, and so he decided to go home and burn some stuff for her. Even though he didn't know her, he just saw her spirit on the street, which is a nice little story. But like, yeah, I don't know. So when I would talk to the second guy, the guy with the Guinness World Record, he was like, who else have you interviewed? I was like, oh, I interviewed that guy. I didn't say anything bad about him. I just said his name, and he's like, him. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was very cryptic. He just said, he wasted his talents in this industry. And I was like, eh?
Yeah,
and
I don't know what the read is on that. I don't know if Chad has some insight.
And then so that guy's wife was there too at that time, the Guinness World Record guy's wife. And then I turned to her and I was like, what do you think about the other guy? And she just kind of said that, like he's just not. He's good at what he does, but he's not that good.
Holly has some stuff here. Let's see what she said. It sounds similar to All Saints Days in other, Catholic countries. It could be. The act of burning is seen to be a physical representation of a person passing from the earth realm to the spirit realm, i.e. the item ceasing to exist and becoming smoke. Hence the burning of
that sounds legit.
joss paper for the dead. The processing of burning causes the item to go from our world to the next. Same as seen in burnt offerings in the Old Testament. It's interesting too that, like, not to get too off track here because I have more questions, but it's interesting too that, what a divide there can be in rituals, death rituals. You get cultures that burn things on people in a pyre and then, dispose of the ashes, like, in India and the Ganges and all that. But then you also get cultures like, ancient Egypt, which are obsessed with preserving the body at all costs, and even like Victorian era and so on, like really dressing up the body and putting it in a fine coffin and putting it in the ground. It is interesting to me that there are like two reactions to death represented over, cultures.
Right.
So you had mentioned in the story, and I know you'd mentioned it when you left, but I hadn't really heard you say it since, that you are planning to make this a manuscript and try to get it published as a book.
Yeah. It's become my thesis for my MFA program. It's what I have to write and hand in at the end of my program. Which, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it, man.
Of course you can. Just don't do a good job.
Yeah.
It's a first draft. What do you care?
No, it's got to be like a final thing. It's got to be in a publishable state.
Yeah, well, whatever. What are they going to do? Give you a low mark in fine arts?
Yeah. Well, they cannot.
Your publisher going to go and look and be like, I don't know. We only take A's. Nobody cares about marks in fine arts.
Well, no, if they don't pass me, then I have to like stay another semester and refine it, and then I have to pay a lot more money. I don't want to do that.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. Do you really have to pay? Like, can't you just come back with it? Go on a hiatus?
Yeah, apparently you do have to pay more money. And I don't know, it's subsidized for me now, but I learned that it wouldn't be subsidized if you fail that, I think it's called a thesis defense or something. I don't know. But just if you got to stay longer to work on your thesis, then yeah, you're going to have to be paying out of your pocket for the entirety of it. And it ain't going to be fun. But I have started writing it. I have about, I think, 40 pages. And yeah, I think this is the easiest story I've written so far.
Well, it's funny you should
because
say
everything
that.
happened.
Yeah, you should. It's funny you should say that because Holly at one point did say, "Did the book just write itself for you, Felix?" Just the fact that you like found letters and then it connected to all these people. I don't even think I'd mentioned, but like, not to blow anything, but she was on the plane with someone, was she not?
Yeah, she was with her newlywed husband, who it really is my uncle, but then
Yeah.
their side of the family kind of cut ties with our side of the family, and uh, everyone from my family, I think, only met him twice. They didn't know the guy. They probably can't even pick him out of a photograph. So,
Wow.
like, we really have no connection to him. Yeah, they were on the honeymoon. They had just gotten married, and then yeah, that was another interesting thing I learned, that how they ended up on that flight. Apparently, they had planned to get married later on in the year. I think in like November or December. So then, if they had stuck with the original plan, they would have gone on their honeymoon then, and they wouldn't have died. But they ended up pushing up their wedding to May because somebody from the husband's side of the family was dying. I think it was like a grandmother or a grandpa. And then in Chinese culture, apparently there's a thing where if you have something bad happening, you kind of try to do something good to counteract it. So when you have someone dying, you have a wedding to hopefully, balance that out and save the dying person, so to speak. Yeah, and so because of that, they had their wedding in May, and then the rest is history.
Um, so I remember when you left, you had said you weren't sure if the family somehow disapproved of him. I imagine that didn't amount to it. It sounds like there was other reasons why they didn't really talk about him.
Yeah, some of our relatives are a little superstitious, and I had an aunt tell me that she went to talk to some, I think, like Taoist priests or something afterwards. Like after the plane crash, she like consulted with some supernatural mediums, and then she brought along a photograph of the husband. And according to her, the priest claimed to see a ghost straddling on the shoulders of the husband.
Wow.
That he was like possessed or something.
Is that something that is like really unusual to hear over there, or do you hear things like that?
You hear stuff about ghosts, but
claiming to see
this was a
it?
little unusual.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this was a little unusual. I mean, another instance of charlatan stuff, I think, personally. But I also had other family members who claimed to have some supernatural dealings in regards with the husband. Like they just believe that his side of the family was cursed and all that. But my side of the family, they kind of I think they really disliked the husband's side of the family, and that dislike came from the fact that they assumed the other side hated us. And then I ended up tracking down the husband's side of the family, actually.
My God, man, this is like more work than I've ever seen you put in anything.
I know, man.
Jesus.
I know. I thought this was like my ticket to the riches, right? I gotta see it all through.
We've talked about this. Writing is no one's ticket to the riches. Minimal support of your own life is what we're aiming for.
Right. But yeah, I found his family, and then they claim that we have it out for them. That we hate them, and therefore they hate us. And it was funny seeing how these different sides they kind of share some common traits, and all rooted in just like I don't know what the word is, but if they had been more open and honest with each other a long time ago, like maybe we would still be more connected to that side today. Maybe there wouldn't be bad blood between them.
Yeah, I mean, I bet that's no. There's nothing culturally constrained about that. That's families for you. Um, if they only said it sooner. Suki says, was there a lot of changes you had to make your story to be published, or was there anything you wanted to include that you couldn't? Well, I imagine there must have been because you didn't. You want to make a book, and the Prism publication obviously is not a book. So, I don't know, select a teaser or something. What's something that you maybe wanted to include that you just couldn't?
I saw the Prism thing as almost a like a beta test, a demo, sort of of the full book, and so I had written it with the intention of trying to include most of the elements that I would expand on in the book. There were a few things I didn't have room to cover. Like I don't think the final product in the Prism thing is as funny as I would like it. I think it's a little bit more serious. And I want a more like dark humor in it. And I also couldn't get into the nitty gritty stuff of the Chinese rituals. I just didn't have room for that, and it didn't fit into the story. I did have one version where I think I had some more explanation about Chinese rituals, but it was just dragging the story down. So in the end, I had to make the executive decision to just cut it. But Prism was very nice in that they really encouraged me to expand on my piece. I think originally when I turned it in, it was about 8 or so pages long, and then they were like, yeah, we'll accept your piece, but we also want you to write more. And then I think I ended up doubling my word count in the end.
Oh wow, they gave you full latitude. I mean, that's a good sign. For people that don't know, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
When you go to publish stuff, usually they're like, listen, we want like 3 paragraphs out of 10. So we're going to cut all of this. And then they change even that. A couple of other questions came in, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I've been writing. Suki says, was there a lot of... Oh, yeah, we already read that. Holly says, did your family not like him before the crash, or did they think he was somehow responsible for her death? I imagine it must have been hard for you to tease that out.
They were fine with him before the crash. I mean, the way they talk about it now, they're talking about him with hindsight, right? So their views of him are colored by the plane crash. I have some relatives who tell me that they got bad vibes the moment they saw him.
Right.
But I'm like, I doubt they actually did have bad vibes.
Yeah, see, that's
right?
what I mean. Like, it would be hard to tease out because I always think of like memories stack on each other like different lenses, right? So, you know, there is the image you had of a person at a point, but then everything that happens after adds like a green lens and a red lens, and then you don't really remember what color you ever saw in the first place. So that's sort of how I've always thought of memories. So I imagine that they've gone back and invented some detail or focused in on stuff that probably they didn't really have.
But the husband's family, they're island dwellers, so they live on one of the many islands in Hong Kong, and it's the Hong Kong equivalent of like rednecks, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you wouldn't think that. I mean, it's not redneck to the point of redneck, but it's like, you know, just try to imagine like a Hong Kong version. Like they're still quite modernized and all that.
Not
you still live in apartments.
I
don't go to McDonald's.
I will take you at your word that that's probably the best way to describe it, but I got to be honest, man. I don't know what a redneck Hong Kong citizen would look like.
They're just generally maybe a little bit more like... I'm trying to use a better word than crude. They tend to be maybe more superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
They believe more in rituals and luck-based thing.
Okay.
Like fate. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe superstitious is the wrong word too, but
No,
um,
I think that sounds like probably about what you mean, like because superstitious is more encompassing.
right.
Well, that's super cool. I'm really glad you got to share the story. I hope chat has been enjoying the story. Like I said, the craziness of like games we're not leaving behind. I just wanted to, basically each week we're sort of a community of artists, and we try to do stuff that interests us first, because if it doesn't pass muster for us, then it's hard for us to see how it could for anybody else. So I've really enjoyed talking to you about this. I do have more questions, but I know we're sort of coasting towards our end here.
I think we spent
Um,
enough time talking about me.
well, I think our numbers were very stable. So it wasn't like you started talking about yourself and like 15 people left. Um, um, but yeah, I mean the zaniness and the craziness will be back, but this was a little more calm, and I wanted people to get a chance to know you, Felix, because all they really were getting to know about you was like little funny details in an incomplete picture, and I didn't want them to start to see you a certain way that I think is unfair. Like we're all quirky. So that was also a motivation of mine, because I want people to get to know our writers here at the Varietal. So I thought we could do something really quick, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I wrote. I'm going to read it for you guys, and then I'll just do a brief explanation of some principles of writing. So if that's something that interests you, if you want to know like the stuff that Felix and I think about when we write, that's sort of where we'll wrap up. But before I do, I haven't really ever established what the Varietal is. All I've said is it's just Vancouver writers writing, and come read our stories, and we do some streams. So I'll give you guys a bit more detail. The Varietal was a group project with a group of fiction writers who took a class together at SFU with a 1-year certificate program in creative writing called the Writer's Studio, which, while I don't think it's very well known outside of writers' circles, actually is pretty well regarded in writers' circles. It's not. If you talk to another writer, there's a good chance they would know of it. The thing is, though, in that you do your group classes where you learn about stuff together, but then you break off into, what did they call us? Cohorts?
Cohorts.
Yeah, that's right. Cohorts. You break off into cohorts.
Fancy word.
Yeah, a fancy word for, creative writing. You break off into a cohort themed around like a genre. And we were all in the fiction genre. And after it ended, none of us really wanted to lose that connection. If I'm being honest, and I don't know about you, Felix, but a lot of the reason why I paid for that course in the first place, because I kind of already knew a lot about writing going in, was to meet other writers who I felt were serious about being writers. Is that sort of your influence as well?
Not me, man. I'm a lone wolf for life. No, I mean, I genuinely thought that writers are supposed to be more cutthroat. I thought we're supposed to, on the surface, befriend each other, but really we're going like, what's this melon farmer doing? Like how do I one up him? How do I steal his work and claim it for my own?
I think there's elements of that in any creative endeavor. Like there are people I can think of, not so much from our cohort, well, definitely not from our cohort, but from our class, I mean, that maybe are on the borderline of that and view it that way. But I would say that actually what I think marks writers out is that they tend to be isolated. And so, it was nice to have a group. But anyways, we kept meeting, and we didn't think much of it. We kept meeting for about 2.5 years now, or something like that, almost 3. No, over 3. What am I talking about? It's 2021. More than 3 years.
When did we meet?
2018. So over 3 years, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And we only discovered when we reconnected with our old, what did they call it? Like I'm going to say like teacher or professor, but that's not what they called him. Felix.
Mentor.
Yeah. Thank you. You're my memory. I was just going to say, Felix, you're my memory. Kevin Chong, who is obviously an established writer and has written lots of really good books. The most recent one being a kind of riff on Camus' The Plague, which he wrote before this plague. It was just really convenient timing for him.
Because of him.
Yeah, that's right. It's Kevin Chong's fault. Kevin Chong said to us, literally no other group has ever done this, stayed together this long. And the other thing that I think made us want to like create the varietal is every one of us has a distinct style and interest and influence. I wouldn't say anybody writes like anybody else. And apparently that is also rare. Apparently you usually get like 2 or 3 different types of writing out of a fiction group with some style changes, but the same basic types. But no, I mean, we have, Dana does a more sort of journalistic, mixed with kind of a modern, sharp style with a lot of wit. You do more personal but humorous, dry observation stuff. I didn't necessarily start this way, but I really drifted towards more spec fic with a literary kind of mood. And I mean, I could go on, but I realize that's probably not the most interesting thing to listen to. Well, like Diane has a really sharp wit, and she has a background in Diane's story is going up either tonight or tomorrow. There was a bit of a delay, but it's either tonight or tomorrow. Diane has a background in film and television. And that really comes through. She has a good sense of like scene breaks and a momentum in a story and whatever else, and has a completely different tone from like Avalon, who has a background in English lit and really likes Gothic literature and so on. And so writes more, specifically crafted, meticulous kind of paragraphs with a lot of subtlety that you can get out of multiple reads. And Spencer is like inventive and experimental, and Erica is experimental but in a completely different direction, and there's actually 2 others, but I won't name them because I don't know if they want to be a part of it right now. They're sort of on a hiatus, traveling the world or dealing with some other stuff that took them away from their writing, and hopefully when they do reconnect, they'll be interested in posting up some stories, because they're also wonderful writers with completely unique backgrounds and completely unique styles and interests. One of them writes plays for theater. And so varietal means variety, as I think you probably already put together. And so what I wanted to do was, rather than start like a literature journal where you take stuff from all over, which is more like a business model than anything, was I just felt like we were sitting together writing really great stories, but it was really hard to get them out there. And when we did, they were really fractured. And I kind of just liked our chemistry as a group and how much variety we gave to each other. And so I wanted to have a place where we could put some stuff as we had it. And if we wanted to go on and take it to other publishers and stuff, we could. But people like yourselves who are watching now could read it and engage with it and get to know people like Felix here today. Or if you caught it last week, on Saturday, I did a reading of one of my stories, and I answered some questions about process and how that story came together. I don't know. I just felt like it was a valuable way for us to spend our time, and I think we all felt that there must be people out there interested in just some stories, and then the streaming kind of came out of the fact that like not everybody sits down and reads a web page, man. Right? Like,
Reads.
Yeah, there's like 10,000 blogs out there, and I don't really know too many of them And I think part of the problem is there's ones I would enjoy, but it's hard for me to differentiate. So this is a chance for people to come here, get to know us. And if you go, man, I don't like those people, they're annoying, then, you know, you can make a clear choice without having to read a bunch of stuff and then be like, yeah, this was a waste of time. But if you do like it, then you can take a path and start to see what kind of stories that myself and Felix and all of the people I've named have written. And so we decided to go into this project together. So it's not really like a get rich quick scheme or anything like that. It's because it's writing on the internet, which is not a way to make a ton of money or anything. It's just a chance to like get to know you guys and to so you get to know us, and if you like stories, to read them. And, you know, down in the description is our webpage where we post up our stories. We post up one each week. And if you want a little more structure, Tuesday at 6:30, I read fairy tales from old times next to a fireplace. And we just kind of chill out and read old stories from Hans Christian Andersen, Mother Goose, things like that. And then Thursday nights, we do something with the group where we try to do some writing. And occasionally on Saturday mornings, as a writer is willing to do it, we have a writer read their own work and then answer questions afterwards. I do
want to take a moment here and like quickly thank you for the work you've done, Rory, because even though this is a group project, you know, like you've really taken the initiative and, you know, figured everything out for the rest of us, from the website to the stream, and like I don't think it's been said, you know, just simple thank you, but like,
oh, thank you.
I just want everyone here to know that you've put in the most work out of all of us, and this is only possible because of what you've done.
Well, thank you so much. That's sweet and a half lie. I think how much work a person's put in is relative. Like, some people are really busy and they've still made time. So, you know, I might make a video actually a little bit later. It'll be a pre-recorded one that summarizes all this. So if you have friends or something who are interested, you can pass it on to them and say, like, you know, if this looks like something you'd want, then you can. But I just wanted to say it here because I realized I'd never said it. Somebody pointed that out. We got some comments here. Just fleece it out. So thank you for sharing, referring to you, Felix. Very interesting to hear more about your story. Suki said, I really don't mind the change in format. I thought this was very interesting. Thank you, Rory and Felix. Well, thank you, Suki. And then Just Fleece It Out said, ice cream police. That's it. And Holly's house said, so when is the merch coming? I want my Felix Wong t-shirt. I have so many merch ideas, but there's no point in getting merch until we have a certain amount of viewers, right? Otherwise, it's just going to be boxes that sit around my house.
You're gonna sell like 5 t-shirts, maybe. That's it.
And they'll all be Suki just feeling bad for me. But I did have ideas. I really kind of want to make a shirt that has a badge on it and says ice cream police. Now, Felix, I'm gonna wrap. I want to address something that we talked about last week. I said if we could get to 35 subscribers, I would buy clogs and send them to you. We are currently at 31 subscribers. So if you guys, if we can find 4 more subscribers to the channel, then I will buy clogs and send them to Felix. And he has promised to send us video and pictures for the Instagram and here of him in them. And if you don't know where this is connecting to, go back and watch our romance stream. It's a Lit Games. It's in our Lit Games playlist on the channel. It's called like, is it going to be romance this time or something? That's where the clog thing was established. That's also where the ice cream police came from, if you guys haven't seen that. Okay, so I don't want to take too much time. Do you mind if I read my 2 stories and then discuss like the differences here, Felix? We can both discuss the differences.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the first one is a literary fiction version, and just to remind people who weren't here in the beginning, these are the events. The protagonist wakes up late. When they go outside, they discover their car is missing. They quit their job. So those three things have to happen. So I wrote in a literary fiction style and then in sort of a horror style. And we're going to kind of discuss, like, from a technique perspective, how the same basic plot changes based on, like, your goals and your setting. It would be a lie to say I slept in. This is the literary fiction version. I didn't sleep anymore. I laid awake and thought of time's eternal creep, timed out by passing headlights glancing across the ceiling. The alarm was ringing and I knew it. I heard it. Beep, 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 beep. After about a half an hour, my sense of responsibility slammed back in my chest with panic. Actually, I just realized something. Just give me a second here. As usual, I twisted out of my damp sheets and ran to the bathroom. I smacked my face against the doorframe and a crimson split opened on my forehead. I ripped some toilet paper and dabbed. My teeth were brushed with the power of furious anxiety. The warm blood dripped down my head and contrasted my cold skin. I spit out the toothpaste, grabbed my keys, and swung open the door. There was the green grass bejeweled by rain. There was the oil-slick roads of hissing puddles. The road extended into my driveway. My driveway. Oh my God, my driveway. It was flat, empty, and wholly absent a car. For a moment I stared. I wondered about what work would say, what my coworkers would say, and how I would make rent. Then I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, dialed work, and said, I quit. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a great story, but it's done in literary style. So for you, Felix, what marks out like a literary fiction style?
I don't mean this as offensive.
Yeah.
I mean this in just general literary stuff. I think if I find myself bored by it.
No, actually, I think this is a fair thing to say.
Right. Like, because it generally, I think a lot of times it dramatizes these really small moments.
Yes.
Right. Like,
yes.
Yeah. And then there's that here too, right? With like ripping in toilet paper, it's like stuff you like may not normally see in a story, but then we slow down. We get a lot of sensory details in regard to that.
I don't
know what it means, but
yeah, exactly. So this is exactly what I was trying to like get across, and what I see is that basically it's interesting because literary or literature is not a genre. Literature speaks to an impact, like a meta-changing impact that a story had when you say something is literature. So, for example, Lord of the Rings is largely considered literature. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But in modern terms, we would have classed it as fantasy, right? So, it's interesting that it became a genre, but sometime before me, so I don't really know where its origins were. It definitely became about small moments described in meticulous detail with a lot of introspection. And so what the difference is when I'm writing this is there is no rush. There's no plot point I'm really trying to get towards. Plot points are very secondary, right? What matters when I'm writing something that's meant to be more literary is that we get a full sense of a character and their decisions are played out in those small details. So there's always like this little web of meaning, like why is the blood warm and the skin cold? And like there's this, if you ever hear anybody talk about them like that, it's these meticulous details about where they're trying to portray or show some emotional experience or revelation through endless detail. It always starts with somebody who either can't sleep or sleeps too much. It always includes a description of rain. And it, for so often, is about the little rituals of, and how emotions are affecting them, of getting ready for something, whether it's an outing or whatnot. So when I write this, I know that one of the things, if we're talking just technique, I know that one of the things that comes with literary fiction is if you're to make it interesting, because it's not driving towards necessarily a plot point. That's not its grab. And because it's not really usually about a lot of interaction with a lot of people. Like usually there's only like a few exchanges and they're usually weirdly empty. It's entirely about this like one person and their thoughts. I know that the language matters more. That really what a lot of people who are reading literary fiction are looking for is a good turn of phrase or an interesting use of an adjective or something like that. So, you try to come up with stuff that's a new or interesting detail to have noticed about getting ready in the morning or whatnot. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you definitely have to lean towards being a little bit more poetic.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Actually, I before going to SFU, I didn't even know literary fiction was a thing. I didn't know there was a like literary and non-literary divide. And I let me take this opportunity to ask you, like, what do you think the difference is between like, say, literary fiction and fiction that is not literary?
So I think that's a perfect thing to ask. So if I'm writing something where, like, for example, The Sands of Tanari, the story that's up right now, I was making no attempt to be literary. Because part of what marks that out to me is I had specific world building details that basically each line was advancing that. And usually literary stuff is not that concrete. It really does tend to be like a new way to describe depression or anxiety or something. Like it's stuff like that. It's not even really physical descriptions, because like Tolkien does a lot of description, and I think he is relying on prose to create the interest that keeps you in the page. So that's why some people check out, because it's not a lot of events to the main plot. It's a lot of creative description that it kind of tickles the mind, if you will. But in that case, he's trying to capture a journey or an experience or something like that. But with literary fiction, I think at its worst, it's kind of indulgent and self-absorbed, because it is about one experience, and it's indulgent in the sense that it's like an obsessive amount of detail about it. On the other hand, on its best, it's a really creative sort of form of introspection to either help give you insight to another cultural experience or another person's emotional experience. But yeah, I think literary fiction tends to be more meditative, and then fiction has like somewhere to go. Like when you read a fiction book, if it spent the first 3 pages the way that a literary fiction like short story or something does, you'd shut it, because you're looking for a story, like a plot, like a place to go. And I'm not saying that literary fiction doesn't have a plot, but its plot is usually basically the same as the character arc and their own decisions and what shifts them, which I think some people are into and some people just aren't. I don't know if that clarifies anything for you.
I think that's a very apt explanation.
Holly says, "Oh no, I'm a literary fiction nerd. My style of writing with endless descriptions is literary fiction." I think endless description is how a lot of writers start. What tends to happen as you write more is, or write longer, I should say, you write less, and you get more focused. I think when I think about like what my early stuff was in high school, it was basically literary fiction about like, I'm sad someone broke up with me or something. Like it was that kind of
stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Which, I mean, it has a scene and people enjoy it, and I think when it's good, people get comfort from it. But like, I don't know about you, Felix, but as I've written more, the focus becomes more and more about like making sure you have set the scene and the parameters of the room. and the movements of each character, and like getting the basics down becomes more what the prose is about, and then you sort of drive towards some conversation or something like that, but it's still more focused. It's not like, hey, how are you doing? Yeah, I don't know. And like, you cut to the chase more when you write more.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I thought I did, but
So it's shorter. I'm going to read the horror story, and then I'll just sort of compare the perspective. I'm not a great horror writer, I should say. I hope there's enough here to make some of the points. She startled awake. She'd barely slept. Sleep was filled with a dark hall that stretched before her. At one end, she was standing, but black tendrils had creeped under her skin and were gripping her in terrible pain, crushing her lungs so she couldn't scream. At the other end was a figure screaming for her to help, but every step forward was sharp nerve pain. Being awake amounted to her relief, though the fatigue was mounting. She had fallen asleep reading the letters that were left on her kitchen counter, near the locked back door, for the last week. Each just had a number one less than the last, and a picture of her showering. The letters she fell asleep with the previous night said 1. She was late to work, though, so she stood, pulled her pants on, and walked towards her door. She needed to leave her house, her city, and her job. She paused in the hall, opened her phone, and called her work. There was no one there that early, so she left a voicemail saying she was quitting, effective immediately. That voicemail, heard later, did not end with those words. There was a soft gasp police enhancement was able to pluck from the background noise. Then the last words were, "Where's my car?"
Okay, I like something I've learned about, or something I've realized about horror is that it's less story based, and it's more about mood.
Yeah.
And I definitely got that here. I got a little creeped out.
Oh, good. Yay. So yeah, horror was a bit of a new thing for me, and I didn't write it for a long time, and I had kind of a revelation, which was sort of what... It's not a big revelation, by the way, chat. I think everybody else knows this but me. But it was something that prompted me to write The Sands of Tanari. And when I was talking to my lovely editor, Lindsay Vermillion, she had mentioned that she was going to try writing horror too. And so I gave her the same advice. I said, what occurred to me was that horror is not about tropes or certain movements. Like, horror is very open in that sense. While people do depend on tropes like jump scares and misdirection and whatever, that's not really what makes horror. What horror is about is violation. It's about whatever it is that prompts a feeling of violation usually is what is the most horrifying to people. And I think, I sort of drew that observation from multiple things at once when I realized it. But at least part of it was, well, I mentioned this in the stream on last Saturday that, the movie Alien uses a lot of like allusions to rape, which is, so violating. But then you also get things like Nightmare on Elm Street, where basically you're sleeping and that's when you're most vulnerable and things get to you, right? So like violation, the loss of control of parts of your body and stuff like that. That's what comes to mind for me. And I think that the mood that you mentioned is a mood of being out of control. Like, whether it's not being able to see something or whatever else. Because obviously, if you're facing a terrible beast in a story and you're in control and you're powerful, then that's like, that's like a fantasy novel. That's what that is. But if you're in a situation where you're like chained up and there's nothing you can do about it, that's a horror story.
I also think there's stuff about not knowing so much what you're up against.
Yes.
that mystery hang over your head of like, well, what is pursuing me? Well, what am I really fighting against?
I completely agree, and there's so many examples of when horror ruins itself by explaining too much. I think one of the things that I really liked about the Japanese Ring versus the American Ring, though I did kind of like both the movies. I never watched them more than once. They scared the crap out of me, but I found that there was, the premise was there and the story talked about it, but I found that the Japanese one was more comfortable with explaining less. And so like normally in storytelling, comparing different styles of storytelling, that's a bad thing. You're not supposed to, if it's not on the page, you don't get to claim it, right? So like you're supposed to put it on the page. You can kind of hide it a bit if you want people not to notice it. And then, but it's cheap to just not tell people something. It seems like you don't have a story. But with horror, that's often a good thing because as soon as you explain it, it stops being creepy. And I think that comes back to like the knowledge is power thing. Once you can conceptualize it, then you have power over it.
Yeah, same thing happened with that movie. I think it's called Happy Death Day.
I don't know it.
So there's two movies. The first was a horror, Happy Death Day, in which this college girl finds herself in a death loop.
Oh.
Every time she dies, she wakes up that morning and then she ends up dying again. And it's got some comedic elements, but it's mostly horror. And then when they made a sequel, they explained why she got caught in that death loop. They bring in some sciencey stuff, like some pseudoscience that doesn't make any sense. And it's no longer horror. It becomes like a fun slasher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would class that maybe more like a thriller, right? Like Jurassic Park is like a thriller, right? Where you have this sense of being out of control, but nobody calls Jurassic Park a horror. It's not a horror movie. It's, thrilling. They are outgunned and you don't know where things are, but they have some ability to act and some agency, but they're not completely vulnerable to the situation. And so in this one, there's a couple of things I included. So first of all, there's a dream. Anytime something is creeping into your dreams, whether it's an actual presence or whether it's just a memory or a fear you can't let go, well, you don't control dreams. That's why horror likes dreams, because it's something that happens to you. And even if you don't want it to happen, you eventually have to fall asleep. You eventually have to open yourself up to that, and it will. And then it makes reference to the state that we can mostly relate to in dreams, which is something is holding you back. You can't scream and you can't move, right? Have you had dreams like that?
Yeah, there's a word for that, isn't there? I forget what it's called.
We're just
sleep paralysis.
Why would we need to know words? Yeah, sleep paralysis. That's right. Which some people, when they dreamed, will dream of something sitting on their chest, like a demon or something. It's an actual paralysis, really. But when I'm writing horror, like literary fiction, it is focused on experiences, and it does give a lot of description, but it does it towards a different end. The descriptions here are only about things that emphasize loss of control and violation, right? Otherwise, it's just sort of straightforward sentences about their movement, because basically a person who picks up a horror story wants to know about the horror, and then there's some stuff that happens where they move to the next moment of horror. And on that idea of having a lack of knowledge, the idea of there is a key change here in perspective. Literary fiction basically almost exclusively is done in first person. I mean, I guess that's not entirely true, but it's fairly close to true. And that's because... Yeah, and if it's not, it's like it's basically first person with a third person hat on. Like it's
right. Yeah.
Because the only thoughts we ever get or only perspective we ever get, I mean, I know limited third person is that way, but like it's really in depth on their thoughts and still not much about the world, like the way third person is. It's a and that's because it's about an emotional experience and a character arc. But when you're writing that, going in first person makes sense. It makes a lot of stuff easier. You don't have to explain or continually frame how these thoughts are coming to them or whatever else. You're just in their head. With horror, I think in general, it's a mix. But in general, the one thing that third person gives the audience that helps you is removal from that character. So you don't have the subtle guarantee that that person is going to make it. And it also means that that character can be lying to you and you wouldn't entirely know it. So it adds a kind of uncertainty and confusion to the character by putting a little bit of a buffer between you and them. You're not right in their head. You don't necessarily know all their thoughts or what they're doing or what they're thinking. And I think that just contributes to that atmosphere of alienation. So I think it made sense to go third person here. Because, I don't know about you, but if I hear a voiceover, I'm like, either they're going to do some cheap trick where they die in the end anyways, or this person obviously makes it. Right?
Right. I think a lot of times that is the case. I remember watching Kick-Ass, and then there's a moment where they kind of point out this trope where Kick-Ass is like, yeah, even though I'm doing this voiceover, so I'm not gonna live, just roll with it.
I've watched Kick-Ass, and I don't remember that, but that's a good movie. So, I won't yammer on too much longer for this, but just to sort of frame up the choices here, given the idea that I want violation, and I want it to be relatable violation, the first is things getting under your skin, which you can't control, that restrain your movement. So there's loss of power and violation there. And a focus on describing that and not giving much sense of the geography, not giving much sense of who anybody is, no detailed descriptions really of faces unless it serves that. Everyone's kind of an alien that's voice or whatever else. We don't have any conversation here unless they are going to contribute to that. And then we find out about the letters, and the letters are being put in her house, which of course is another kind of violation, right? You would assume that your house is a secure place, but obviously it isn't. And you don't understand why they're getting in because the door is locked, right? So that contributes to this idea that you're invaded and it's out of your control. And then finally, just theft itself is an invasion of privacy. It's a loss of control. Like a thing that you felt like was yours and you had earned is gone. So the theft of the car. And of course, then it's just left implied that something terrible happened, but no description, right? And I think Stephen King said that imagination is always going to be worse than anything I can write. Maybe he didn't. I could just be blending people. But I guess what I wanted to point out here, just before we close up shop, is with writing, the rookie mistake in writing is because they tell you when you're in elementary school, you need to describe things, you need to describe things, you need to describe things. And that's true enough, especially when you're starting out. But if you're interested in writing, a lot of writing is an economy of words and a focus on what you want to do, right? So you can't describe everything without boring people. You can't, explain everything. You can't describe the features of every person you meet. You have to pick the things that give the impression and leave the rest to the reader and really only busy their eyes with stuff that is going to reach your goal. In literary fiction, we said a few things about it. If your goal is some sort of emotional story, then you're only going to put stuff in there that you feel like contributes to being in that emotion. If you're in a horror story, then you're going to look for things that contribute to making the reader relate to a feeling of violation, a loss of control, while also sort of explaining some story stuff. And I guess I wanted to point out, like, if we take this paragraph, on this point, she had fallen asleep reading the letters that were left on her kitchen counter near the locked back door for the last week. There really is no adjectives there, right? Like, there is no the color of any of this, the arrangement of the kitchen or anything. And why, I'll ask you, why wouldn't I include that, Felix?
Because that's not the point, right? Doesn't add anything to it. I noticed you do say, like, you know, the locked back door.
Right.
Yeah. Which was kind of the key takeaway of that sentence there. And I didn't notice it at first. I didn't really even know what the point was. I was like, locked back door, of course it's locked. I don't get it.
Right. Yeah, so the only thing...
in hindsight, it makes sense.
Yeah, so it's really only leaving details. And I guess I won't rattle on too much about this. The only reason I'm really doing this, by the way, is somebody said that people might be interested in knowing a bit more about process. I don't know if that's true. So if it is something you think is interesting, you can let me know, and I can shorten it up and give little tidbits here and there about stuff that you learn. Because writing is a craft. It's also an art, but it's a craft. And there are specific skills to things like dialogue and stuff that you actually learn and practice and re-practice and delete everything and try again. Like, it's a skill set on top of an art. And I think sometimes that gets lost. I think even writers contribute to this idea that writing is some sort of magic only we can do. And I mean, that's very poetic and interesting, but it's really not. There are points. Maybe in your first draft, you're pretty freewheeling, but every draft after that is very mechanical and, like, does this make sense? And have I shifted distances? And, like, so on. Well, Caroline says it's super interesting. Well, thank you, Caroline.
Yeah. I always kind of laugh when people tell me that they can't write. And I'm like, you totally can. You just, like, don't want to. Yeah.
And maybe that's a good reason not to write if you don't enjoy it, right? Because it is. I have another, like, sort of flip side of that. I have people who come to me and tell me, "Oh yeah, I want to write a book. I want to be a writer." And I'm like, "Do you though? Like, do you want to be the person who had published a book and goes and gets interviews? Or do you actually want to write? Because let me tell you, writing is sitting alone for 4.5 hours or more going, I don't know. Should the staircase be wood? That would have helped me. Like, later when he comes, it would creak. But this is supposed to be like an old Victorian house. Did they even have wood stairs? Oh, I gotta look this up. And like that's a lot of, like, what writing is like being alone with your thoughts and no guidance, a big blank page. So, you know, that's what you have to like. If you actually like writing. And if you do like writing, or even if you want to try it, to your point, Felix, I'll use the analogy that I always use. I do dance classes with Suki, and people say to me all the time when I mention that, "Oh, well, I'd like to dance." But I
think I said that too.
Yeah, and I'd be like, "Well, yeah, you should come to the classes." They're like, "Well, I'd like to dance, but I don't know how." It's a class. That's the point of a class. You show up not knowing how to do something. That's the starting point. Nobody goes to classes when they know how to do something. That's the whole point. Right. So of course you don't know how to write. Of course you don't know how to play guitar or do whatever. That's where everybody starts. If it's something you want to do and you enjoy doing, write your crap now. And the sooner you get through the crappiness, the better it gets. And then, you never need to be pushing towards anything. It's just a pastime for some people.
That's a really good pep talk.
Yeah, and I mean, if at some point you want to be professional writers or something, like, well, myself and Felix, and I don't know that everybody in the group has that end, but I think most of us do. It is a different headspace. You do have to be a bit different, and how you look at it and how you approach it, and it, you know, some of the magic gets sucked out. You're not just going on inspiration anymore, but you know, that's a different step. Nobody needs to take that step to just write some stuff they want to write. You want to write a memoir about your life because you just want to remember it and maybe your kids can read it. Start writing. First page is going to suck, and I'll tell you, it will always suck. First page of Sansa Tonari is trashed. I wrote it, and as I wrote it, I was like, this is not going to be the first page. And I got through that story, and I sent it off to some writer friends of mine, and they were like, this first page needs to go. And I was like, you are correct.
I think that's often the case. You like usually trash the first paragraph, or something, or you fold it in later.
Yeah, you split it up or something. It's usually just you explaining things to yourself, like what the character looks like or what the world is or whatever. Nothing interesting or necessary, just you trying to get into it. So, I mean, first drafts are trash. They're always bad. Like, nobody writes an amazing first draft. No, anybody who claims that is a liar. I'll give you an example of one of the most famous lies. Jack Kerouac said that he wrote On the Road in one go over like 3 weeks, because he did a lot of speed, on a single roll. He had a big roll of paper and a typewriter, and he wrote it all out. And for many, many, many years, this mythos about Jack writing it all in one go really guided people who wanted to do the kind of beats from the heart, free writing, no editor style. And of course, most of that sucked because first drafts suck. Because Jack Kerouac did write it out on a sheet of paper over 3 weeks, but not his first draft. What he did was he traveled for 2 years and wrote as he traveled. And then what he finally did was stitched together his sort of best pieces that he'd been working on the road for that time into a final manuscript to send away. That is not the same as sitting down from nothing and writing a story.
Jack Kerouac is a liar. That's what we've established today.
And lots of writers lie about this. They lie about lots of things about the process. They say they write like 8 books and they say like, I knew in the first book that everything that was going to happen. Bullshit. No, you didn't. No one does. You had an idea. You had waypoints on the road. So don't listen to the lies. Writers are not nearly as amazing as they like to make themselves out to be. You could totally do it if you really wanted to. But my big piece of advice here is economy of language. You got to know what you want to do. If you're not too sure yet, then just scramble around with that crappy first page. And when something catches your interest, you're like, I kind of like this dog. I want to know what this dog's going to do. Then focus your prose eventually onto that. Whatever's most interesting gets the words. Whatever isn't relevant to building that goes away. I don't need to know about every person's expression. I don't need to know about anything like that. And you will feel like you're writing something too simplistic when you're writing it. But I promise you it will be more readable and people won't even notice. Because when you're sitting for like 8 hours staring at something, you notice every word and arrangement. But readers don't do that. They flash through it. They just absorb it. So focus on just practical sentences with a few descriptions here and there that serve that goal. Yeah. So I won't do this too often because I feel like I'm going to disappear up my own ass. But
I did complain last week that we were not educational enough.
Is this educational? I don't know. Holly says, my friend and I got stuck for weeks with her writing on names. Oh, names. Oh, God. Oh, this is one thing I envy nonfiction writers. You already have names. Coming up with names is a nightmare, but I'll tell you what I do, because it doesn't matter. The first draft sucks, and find and replace is an easy thing to do. Just give them a name. Pete. Doesn't matter if it fits or not. Just throw a name in and keep writing. Like, don't get fixated on trying to make it perfect, because I promise you your first draft will suck. There is no good first draft that has ever been written. So just get it done, and then you can circle back and come up with names that are references to Greek gods or whatever else. Like, if you're ever at a point where you're like, I can't get past this, it's also completely legitimate since no one's going to see your first draft. If you're not too sure what these characters should do to get from this city to that city, just write a sentence. You could even tag it bold so you'll look at it later that just says they go to the next city, I don't know what happens, and carry on with the idea you had in the next city. First drafts are like sometimes basically patchworks of quilts of like ideas, and sometimes more developed. Diane has my favorite story of that, actually, who has her story this week. She had submitted a version of the story where she had an idea for the ending. She was a few chapters still away from the ending. And so there was a sentence, I wish I could remember the exact wording of it, that said, some stuff happens, these two characters, I won't give it away because, the book ever happens, but this event happens between these two characters, and then we just cut to like a completely different version of the character. And that's legitimate in a first draft, in a writing group, that's fine. It just was very funny, and I remember saying in the group, I wish I could do this in my writing, like final drafts, because there's parts that I don't want to write that I have to write.
Just get the reader to fill it in their heads.
yeah. Aragorn fights, some orcs here. He wins. Next scene.
Yeah. Let's just skip the battle.
Yeah,
I don't want to write it. It's too much work.
Every story is like 10 sentences of just basic plot actions. Well, Felix, I have no idea if this worked. I think people really enjoyed your story. We'll think up something.
Even though they haven't read it.
Well, your story as you told it, like story in an oral way. But if you guys do want to read the story that he was talking about, the sampler for the book, it's in Prism. It's not on our website, unfortunately. But Prism is totally something you can get. They probably even have an online version if you guys are really curious about it. Other than that, though, the story this week, which unfortunately is not up yet, there was a bit of a delay, comes from Diane Carruthers, who is a writer we have not featured before. It's super interesting. I think it's called My Favorite Notebook. And it is, again, a completely different perspective, deals a bit with ADHD. It's a really interesting story, and I'll be sure to let you guys know if you follow us on Instagram or Twitter when it goes up. Otherwise, check the website tomorrow, varietal-literature.ca, and it'll be up there in our story section. Thank you so much for all who hung out, stayed the whole course.
Yeah, thanks for listening to me babble about ghosts and stuff.
Yours was the most popular part, for sure. And you guys take care of each other out there. I will be back on Tuesday reading more fairy tales. And if you've never seen one of those and you can't wait till Tuesday, this very channel has a whole playlist of stuff. I've done The Little Mermaid. I've done the story that Frozen was based off. I've done Cinderella. I've also done stories that you may not have ever heard of. I did a horrifying story that I can't believe anybody thought was for children called Bluebeard last week. I won't give it or last Tuesday, actually, 2 days ago. I won't give anything away, but holy crap, that is not a story for children in the Mother Goose book. In a book, by the way, that doesn't have any other story that bad. And in the descriptions of all the videos, unless I have forgotten and gotten lazy, there will always be a timestamp to jump you to stuff if you want to skip the preamble or whatever, or jump to a story in one of the fairy tale streams. You can do that. But thank you very much. Make sure you check out our story of the week. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you haven't already, for going all the way to Thailand and learning about smoke and fire and death in Chinese culture and his own culture. Can we get a like, Spike? Everybody give us a like. Thank you, Felix. I know. Thumbs up never look cool. Thank you, Felix, for sharing as much as you did. And thank you, folks, for hanging out and listening to me blab about writing.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.